Hi, my name is Vicki. I'm the Accounting Partner Director here at Source Advisors. Source Advisors has been around for nearly as long as the R&D tax credit scheme itself, and we continue to provide support and assistance for accountants and their clients. Welcome to At Source, our series where we talk about all things R&D tax. Today, I'm joined by Deborah Chapple, R&D Director here at Source Advisors. Hi, Deb.
Hi, Vicki. Pleased to be here.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So just to kick this off, obviously, we're talking about inquiries and dispute resolution today.
A very popular topic.
HMRC have opened lots more inquiries over recent times. Why do you think they're doing that? What do you think the background is? What are they trying to achieve with the increase in inquiries that we've seen recently?
Okay, I think to answer that point, we have to consider what the landscape's been like for the last, since 2022, spring of 22. Fundamentally, we were aware of a really large volume of fraud and error within the scheme. It was getting a lot of heat, really under the spotlight. And by virtue of that, through Treasury, through government, through HMRC and policy in general, they became really aware that they had to tackle that. They had to have a measure and a way of evaluating what was the level of that fraud and error. And compliance checks became a routine measure to a way of determining whether there was indeed that perceived level of error and fraud. So as such, we, as I said, from about March 22, up until that point, I would say the level of compliance checks were roughly about 1%. So you could argue it was relatively lacking policing actually by HMRC. But from there on, we're now roughly sitting about 20%. So 1 in 5 claims are being scrutinised by HMRC. So it's been a bit of an uphill struggle for accountants, taxpayers, just generally the industry as a whole.
Sure. And one of the questions we get asked probably on quite a regular basis is do we know what the triggers are? Is there something that is obvious that HMRC are looking at? We've heard things like SIC code, there's a SIC code trigger. In your experience, what do you think that could be, or are there any at all?
I definitely think there are triggers. I think there is definitely method and practice that needs to be adhered to give a satisfactory report and claim to HMRC. One of the things that fundamentally has changed is the mandatory application of the additional information form. That was incepted in August of 23. And when that came in place, what that gave HMRC was a baseline of information that everybody needed to present. Interestingly, it was missing the competent professional, which I think is a really valued piece of information with regards to the claim itself. But it gave a baseline. And that baseline meant that when HMRC were receiving this level of data, they had the ability to risk profile claims. So coming back to your question about SIC codes, I think that is absolutely one of the vital pieces of data that they receive. We have seen over the last few years that there are some key SIC codes that are getting scrutiny. And they're the ones I would say that are perceived to not be general sectors where there is rich R&D. But in addition, if you do reach that point and you trigger a compliance check because there is that risk profile increased, then likelihood is caseworker will have a look at the claim and evaluate as to whether that needs to take it to the next stage, which is the opening of the inquiry.
So, as I say, lots more inquiries, and I note something that you know and deal with on a day-to-day basis. So, can you just give us an overview of that inquiry process, and in particular, where dispute resolution comes in?
So you've got 3 teams within HMRC that are responsible for issuing the inquiry notices. And that is the ISBC team. That's a volume compliance team. So they tend to deal with the smaller end, so either the SMEs and the smaller business units. In addition, then you've got the WMBC, so that's the mid-sized tier businesses, but that is with a named caseworker. So there's a fundamental difference. I should have said that already, actually. ISBC is just a generic mailbox, no assigned caseworker, so very different in how their approach is. Then lastly, you've got the enterprise clients that fall within the large business team. And again, that's with a customer manager who deals with that, generally someone you've been working with already. But fundamentally, there's quite a transition and change between whether the issuing officer is from one of those departments. You also asked about dispute resolution. If inquiries go down a pathway where you can answer the questions in a manner that satisfies HMRC, then hopefully you reach a point of conclusion that's satisfactory to both parties. If, however, you don't, then you are in the position where you've reached an impasse. You need to find a solution that's going to enable both parties to walk away from that and feel they've actually looked into things fully, wholly. On that basis, then that can be a number of avenues. That could be, for example, you've got statutory review. You could ask for somebody else to review it. You could go through alternative dispute resolution, which is a mediation route. And that enables the taxpayer and HMRC to have someone who is mediating that process and kind of helping each other to get on the same page. And then really going down a full litigation route, you've got the first tier tax tribunal. And of course, we've seen a number of cases in that area where it's been required to take things all the way.
Really interesting. So as part of your role with us at Source Advisors, you obviously get very involved in sort of inquiries and dispute resolution, particularly for third parties where we're asked to step in and help with that process. I'm sure you see lots of different types of claims that have gone into the inquiry process and how they've been responded to and the communication with HMRC once that inquiry has been opened. What do you see as poor practice? What are the things that you've seen as sort of a bit of a red flag of this is what you shouldn't do when handling an inquiry?
I would say fundamentally, it's not really understanding what HMRC are asking. Now, on occasion, that could be because the report has been poorly framed in the first place. So there is a lack of adherence to the DSIC guidelines. There's an inability to clearly demonstrate what the advance is, how you've identified the baseline, etc., and really show the boundaries of R&D. And quite often, without sounding too critical, when I'm reviewing third-party reports or being asked to support third-party inquiries, generally speaking, if you're on the wrong footing already and you attempt to reply using that same measure, you're getting nowhere. So what we've found to sort of turn that on its head in terms of the ways that we've been able to help is we've had to kind of go grassroots up, rebase everything, and if I may, we speak HMRC's language. We frame it in a manner that we know is going to meet the necessary requirement. And we've had a lot of success. So we know it works. We know it's the way to do it.
Sure. This is probably a bit of an unfair question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How long is the inquiry process? Now, I know it depends on how far it goes before it's resolved, but if a claim goes into inquiry, closed after second response, or it goes to ADR, or maybe even goes to FDT. How long do these things take?
In the short answer, too long. In an honest answer, it really varies. It varies dependent on that issuing department. I would say from my own experiences that ISBC tends to be a bit longer, and not wishing to knock that team, but I would say they are perhaps slightly less experienced in the process. So there is almost a bit of a checklist formula they're following. As I say, if it's framed in the right way early on, you can find that you salvage the whole position in one response. We have had claims that have gone much, much further than that. So you could knock something down in the space of a couple of months, or you can see something go on for a really long time, particularly if people are poles apart. And I've got a recent example, actually, of something that was sort of going down that second route. And I wouldn't say in any way it was as a result of the way it was being framed, but there was a degree of digging the heels in from the officer in point. And we have just literally recently received notice that the whole thing has been accepted in full. So sometimes you've got to show them your salt.
Yeah. Well, actually, segueing nicely onto my next question, to be honest.
Okay.
One of the conversations we have quite frequently with accountants is around how much you push back on HMRC. So you have a client, thinking from our accountant's perspective, you have a client who is really confident in their compliance. They've taken advice. They are assured that they are seeking to achieve a technology advance, overcoming uncertainties, all the good things that we talk about. At what point would you say, okay, it's time to withdraw, or should you always have that tenacity, to use your word, to keep going and defending your position?
Okay, so assuming that it is a valid claim and there are no other commercial reasons why they shouldn't continue fighting it, i.e. there's not other business needs, I would say fight it all the way. You should stick by the fact that you're doing qualifying R&D, the fact that you've identified it in the first place, the fact that you have affirmed it against the guidelines, you meet all the criteria. Then again, requirements aside in terms of business needs, etc., I say take it all the way. That's my view. However, assuming you're in the other camp, where there's a possibility that maybe the advice you've been given is not exactly on point, and maybe there are some weaknesses in your case, then I think it's important to understand when you've reached the end of the line on that one, and you need to find a way of exiting gracefully to ensure that you protect yourself from penalties, interest, etc. Interest is, unfortunately, will be something you're likely to have to pay back if you've already received the funds, but penalties are something that can be an interesting point in terms of making sure that you can demonstrate that you went through due process in a manner that wasn't careless.
Sure. Just going back to dispute resolution,
Yes.
A claim's gone into inquiry. At what point do you think a client should be considering dispute resolution? And probably linked to that, do you think more businesses, more claimants that are in that process will start using forms of dispute resolution, ADR, going forward?
So the point of using dispute resolution is that you've reached essentially an impasse. You've reached a point where just both sides are not understanding one another. You've gone through a couple of iterations of response. Perhaps you've even had a meeting. I mean, hopefully the meeting is sufficient. But if that meeting is with maybe an inexperienced caseworker, maybe somebody doesn't quite understand your industry or understand the R&D that you're representing, then it's time to consider alternative channels. And those are, as you say, dispute resolution. Now, the complexity with ADR is there's a long waiting list. So again, it does draw out the process. And only recently explaining some options to one of our clients and discussing the merits of the channels and the offerings to them, it was interesting just to basically establish if they're on side. And what I mean by that is, do they have the appetite to vest further time, maybe with their competent professionals or other staff members, in order to make sure that they are recompensed, rewarded, given the correct judgment that states they've done what they say they've done. It's not going to be right for everybody. But so far, as I said, it's more of a rarity in the sense how often we need to use it. We tend to be able to deal with these things within the confines of the general process. But do I think more people will use it? Absolutely, because if HMRC are failing to see the R&D, I'm of the opinion that you have to take it to the next level, and you must use those levers to enable a final solution that meets the requirements of the taxpayer.
Sure. So final question, and it probably is the $1 million question. So I'm not going to hold you to this, but
Okay.
I'd like your opinion on it.
Okay.
Do you think the level of inquiries that we've seen over the last few years, do you think the rate that they are opened will continue? Do you think the number of inquiries will go down? What do you think we will see over the next 6-12 months from the point of view of the current inquiry rate?
I think that's a really interesting point. And I would say at the moment we've seen the flow slightly reduced. And that's probably as a result of the fact there's been so much heat on it in recent years. We've got the inception of the merge scheme. It's obviously going to draw some attention to it. We've got the various reforms. We've got to establish if that's actually going to be something that people are going to apply in the correct manner. Let's not forget, there has been fraud and error within the scheme. At the moment, there's a suggestion that that's at around 10%. I think the point that's worthy of note is the only way to determine whether a scheme is being run well and being run efficiently is you must have compliance checks. You need to enable the correct treatment, the correct adoption of the scheme by way of challenging it and checking it. So checks and balances are always going to be required. I think it's fair to say that just because we've maybe stemmed the flow at the moment and maybe we've eradicated some of the bad behaviours, that doesn't mean to say it's going to stop there. And I think we need to expect there's always going to be compliance checks, and that will increase again over time.
That's great. Thank you so much, Deb.
Pleasure.
Really useful. And I think probably you will be answering a lot of questions that we get asked on a regular basis. So hopefully really useful content. Thanks so much.
Many thanks. Thanks for having me.